Well, good evening. Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to this episode of the Better Together Facebook Live. My name is Barb Roos. I am the host of this Better Together Facebook broadcast. And for those of you who are not familiar with Better Together, this is the spot on the internet where we gather together. And it doesn't matter where you come from or what you've been through. Here on Better Together Facebook Live, we share hope, we share help, and we find the practical next steps so that we can all get better together. And tonight is a special night because we actually have back to back with Barb. Like, I just made that up off the top of my head. So if you're joining me for this first part, I want you to drop into the comments and just say hey, or if you want to, show me some love. Hit the love button or the like button so that I know you're out there. But I would love to hear from you. Come in and say hey. And today, I would love to ask an icebreaker question for you to jump in on as we do the Better Together Facebook Live. Inviting you into the conversation is a big part of this actual experience. And so say your name, and for our icebreaker, is share the name of someone in your life of women who've been there for you in hard times. Go ahead and drop that in the comments. And as we go through this evening's broadcast, we will be putting some of those on the screen. In fact, I think we've got some comments that have come in right now. And so thank you. We got Vicky. Vicky, thank you for joining me. Vicky is coming in from Edisto Island in South Carolina. Vicky is a friend of mine. She is the CEO of First Place for Health, a national faith-based wellness organization. And so I love doing ministry with Vicky. They have great online Bible studies. And so Vicky, if you could do me a favor, my friend, because COVID has been hard on our bodies, drop into the comments the website for First Place for Health, because I just feel led that we need to do that today. So we've got other comments, ladies. Thank you for joining in. Amy, thank you for saying hi. Ladies, tell us about who's been helping you through hard times. Amy says her girl Brenda Gibbs has been huge for her the last 2 years. I love you both. You guys bless me. Diane Andrews for Vicky has been there for her. That's wonderful. Friends, if you are new to the Better Together Facebook Live, I'm so happy you're here this evening. Zelda, I got a message from Zelda earlier today. She's from Macon, Georgia, and they're getting ready to do the Surrendered Bible Study. The ladies who've been there for me, Zelda says, are Lula B, Elaine Perry, Dawn, Temple, and Lynette. Oh, Zelda, I'm glad you've got that community around you. Well, ladies, I asked that icebreaker question because it's related to what we're going to talk about in just a bit with tonight's guest. But before we do that, today is a special day. So on this broadcast, we're talking with a special guest, my friend Heather Dixon. But in less than 30 minutes, I am also going to do a special broadcast to celebrate the release of my new book. It came out today. And it's titled Surrendered, 40 Devotions to Help You Let Go and Live Like Jesus. This released today. And so at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I'm going to be on here and I'm going to read from the devotional. We're going to have story time. I'm going to teach one of my favorite illustrations that help us see the vision of what God wants for us in difficult wilderness seasons. And I'm also going to tell you about some freebies that I want to give to you so that you can learn how to let go and let God. So please stay with me, and we are going to just have a great time. So let me get over to today's guest. But before I do that, we've got some more ladies who jumped in the comments. And so my fabulous producer, Tabitha, she is working backstage. Tabitha, who else do we have this evening? My dear friend Elizabeth, who is the marketing director with my editor Sally Sharp at Abingdon. They also work with Heather, our guest tonight. Thank you for being here. And we also have Vicky. Vicky put up First Place for Health. Thank you. Anybody else have before we get on to tonight's guest? Becky, her prayer journal has been there for her. Thank you. Journaling is huge, absolutely huge. So, well, friends, tonight, the reason again why we're talking about friends is because my guest today is going to talk about how do we live when we're facing a story in our lives, essentially our life story that we don't want and we can't change. And so it is my joy to introduce to you Heather Dixon. She is an author, a speaker, a Bible teacher who understands living with a story that's not easy. Diagnosed with an incurable and terminal genetic disorder that she inherited from her mother, Heather is passionate about encouraging and equipping women to trust in God, face their greatest fears, and live with hope, especially in the midst of difficult circumstances. When she is not blogging at the Rescued Letters or speaking at women's conferences, Heather loves to make the most of everyday moments like cooking for her husband and son, brainstorming all the ways to organize Legos and superheroes, checking out way too many library books, and unashamedly enjoying all things Disney. Heather is a regular contributor to Journey magazine and the author of 3 Bible studies, including Determined, Living Like Jesus in Every Moment, Renewed, Finding Hope When You Don't Like Your Story, as well as a study on Joshua. And so, friends, please help me welcome Heather Dixon to the Better Together Facebook Live.
Hey everyone, thanks so much, Barb, for having me on. I'm so thrilled that you would join us tonight on this Tuesday night. I'm so glad to see you, so glad to be here.
Well, I am thrilled to have you here, and we are going to get right in it this evening because your new Bible study, Renewed, is written for the woman who doesn't like her story and can't change it. So this evening, we got a number of women who are listening in, and we all are facing difficult seasons in life, but there's something particular about the woman that God has called you to reach. And so tell us a little more.
Yeah, so, like you mentioned in your, very gracious introduction, thank you. But, I'm a survivor of an incurable disorder. And so, for me, I don't like that part of my story. And so a lot of the women in my community are dealing with things just like that. Maybe they don't have an incurable disorder. Maybe they don't have a scary medical diagnosis, but they're dealing with, a death of a loved one, or a sudden lifestyle change where maybe they've had to, suddenly get up and move, or, things in their life, these stories they're harboring that they can't change. And they also didn't choose. And I'm not just talking about, women who are walking through just certain seasons of hardship, just like little bitty bookend seasons of hardship. No, these are women who, have had to face life altering stories. And so that's who I wrote Renewed for.
Wonderful. And part of this, as I read in the introduction, you were diagnosed with the same illness that your mother was diagnosed with. And so this idea, you and I have known each other for years, this idea of not liking your story, you were told by the doctor a number of years ago to prepare your bucket list and live your life well. So talk to the audience briefly about how this personally connects with your life story.
Yeah. So, when the doctor said that, it was kind of a shock for sure. And I think that the idea of bucket list to me was, I was like, oh, okay, well, I thought a bucket list was something that you do when, you're retired and you were checking off all the lists. That you had prepared all your life, like before I die, I'm going to do all these things, right? But it really kind of changed my perspective, and that perspective is kind of always evolving, but it changed my perspective on how I live every single day to say, okay, my bucket list now is realizing I have 24 hours in this day and it might be my last. And I know that seems like a really morbid way to think, but that's the reality when you're living with, the kind of diagnosis that I carry. But the blessing in that, Barb, though, is that, every 24 hours is precious. It's like I'm looking for ways when I can honor God and spend time and make memories with my family. and do things, just it changes the perspective of how I shape those 24-hour days, because I want to find hope in my story. So, that's one of the ways that bucket list living has kind of evolved and has shaped my story. And so, I'm hoping that, with that, the women that join me in this ministry and join me in the Renewed Bible Study will find hope in their story too. And they'll find that same tangible sweetness of knowing that, God is with us in our hard stories, and he can make our life sweet if we just trust him with it.
Thank you. That is beautiful. And the reason why I am thankful that you shared that is because I know there are women out there right now who have faced game-changing events in their lives. And there are other times when we're just going through hard stuff. And so, audience, Heather and I are going to talk through 3 big ideas that we want to share with you this evening about what to keep in mind when your life story becomes when it's hard and you can't change it. And so I want you to stay with us as we talk about these 3 big ideas. But I also have a question for you, audience. And that question is, what is one of the most difficult seasons of your life? Whether it's something you're going through now or something in the past. Drop in the comments about that difficult season. For me, for those of you who are who've been following and hanging out with my ministry, we had a decade-long addiction crisis in our family. That was a long, hard season. So you can share in the comments whether it was a season of illness or perhaps, like Heather, it was a diagnosis that you couldn't change, or perhaps the loss of something in your life. But share that in the comments. While Heather and let's start with the first thing that you talk about in the Renewed Study that I actually read yesterday. Friends, this is my copy of the Renewed Bible Study. I just received it yesterday. I ordered it and paid for it myself because I've been excited to do it. But Heather, right off the bat, one of the things that you say, the first point is that difficult stories can become setups for the display of divine strength. And so tell us about that.
So one of the things as I was reading through the book of Ruth, and we're in the study we're looking at it from Naomi's perspective, because she's the one that has the hard story. Like Ruth and Boaz, I love them, but they're beautiful and they're stagnant characters. And Naomi is the one who has this transformation from total heartache and total loss as she loses her husband, she loses her 2 sons, and she's forced to, move back home with no way to provide for herself. And so she's the story that I want to follow, because she's the one that I resonate with the most. And I'm thinking my readers will too, certainly a lot of the women in my community. And so, when you start to look at her story and how it's set, the echoes of my high school English teacher kind of, descend on me as I'm reading this, and I'm thinking about all these literary things like the use of contrast, which is often, kind of, it's like, you can't have light without dark, that kind of concept, like the light and the dark, and good versus evil. The contrast highlights the other thing. Well, that's exactly how the beginning of Ruth is set up. It's set in these really, really dark times. It's set in a time when God's people were just not obeying him. Right at the end of Judges, you just hear this, awful, ominous tone, like it was in the days when everybody did as they saw fit, and there was no law, there was nothing, governing them, and it's like really, really dark, right? And so for those of us who are walking through stories that are really, really hard, it can feel like that. Like our stories, maybe you guys have experienced that same emotion, that same weight, feeling like, this is just a really, really dark time for me. And I think the beauty of looking at Ruth from Naomi's perspective is to realize that it's in those dark moments where God begins to flex his muscles, and where we also notice him the greatest. Because Barb, you and I know, like, God is always moving, right? I mean, he's always working, whether we're content or whether we're unsatisfied, whether we're walking through hard stories or good stories. God doesn't change. But it's in those dark places, in those hard stories where we really can realize, okay, he is setting us up for the display of his strength. Because when he pulls us from that type of place, then you can only say, like I always pray this prayer, Lord, let today be the day where, only there be no other question that it is you moving. It is you changing my story. It's you doing things to bring me hope. And it's in those difficult, hard stories, as difficult as they are, where God's movement can also be highlighted the greatest. And so if we can challenge ourselves to say, you know what, my difficult story can be a setup for the display of divine strength, then it may bring us hope to get to the next step with our hard story.
Beautiful. Thank you. Oh, that was so good. Well, when I asked the ladies about their difficult seasons in life, they chimed in. And so I know that they resonated with your words. Brenda said last year when her husband told her that he wanted a divorce, but they worked it out. Amy mentioned her daughter's attempted suicide. Colleen said when she wasn't able to work due to a brain injury for several months. And so your point of being able to see the idea, this idea of displays of divine strength. Colleen shared her testimony at Celebrate Recovery. Beautiful. Zelda, she was dealing with her mom's diagnosis of dementia. And right underneath Zelda, Elizabeth, she has been dealing with her father's diagnosis of dementia. Dawn, thank you, Dawn, for sharing yours. Dawn says her hard season when she lost everything, house, car, relationship, all at once with a baby. And so for all of us, it's difficult when we see hard seasons or hard permanent changes. But as you said, Heather, it's just where we go. This is the place where if we're willing, we can see God at work.
Right.
Now, the second thing that we want to talk about this evening, the first being that difficult stories can be setups for the display of divine strength. But the second thing is this is a place of compassion, ladies. I want you to listen well, that we have permission to grieve. You have permission to grieve. Heather, talk to us about what this means.
Yeah. So if you've ever done a study on the book of Ruth, or if you've looked at Naomi's character, maybe you've heard this word said alongside her name, bitter. If we're familiar with Naomi's story, she's known as the bitter one. She's known as the one who blamed God. She's known as the one who, cried out to him and said, this is awful. But what you don't always hear about her story is how God loved and provided and renewed her story after she even admitted the honest and raw truth of grief to God. She doesn't doubt his sovereignty. She said the Lord's hand is over this. In the first chapter of Ruth, she said the Lord's hand has done this. And so she's acknowledging his sovereignty, but she's also really comfortable expressing raw, authentic grief. And that was one of the things when I woke up from one of my surgeries, a precious nurse said to me, I didn't know what had been going on. And I woke up and I had about 16 staples running down my abdomen. And I had no idea why it was there. And I also had an ostomy bag attached to my abdomen to kind of deal with the ramifications of my ruptured colon. And she looked at me and she said, you have permission to grieve. You have permission to say, this is not the story that I wanted. And it was such a freeing release for me to feel like, oh, I can say to God, I don't want this. This is not what I wanted. And you know what? Here's the thing, Barb. Jesus grieves also. He grieves with us. And we see him in the New Testament grieving. And so I think to skip that step of grieving, it robs us of the chance to acknowledge that this world is broken and we need Jesus. And so, I think sometimes we women are expected to just carry it all and to say, you know what, I've been dealt a hard story and I just got to, pick myself up by the bootstraps and keep on trucking. And sure, sometimes we have to do that. But I just, I want us to remember you have permission to tell God, I don't like this. I don't like my story. And he understands, he knows, and he weeps and grieves with you. And he promises to walk every single step out of that grief with you to bring you through renewed joy. But just the acknowledgement to say, you know what, this is not okay, I think is a freedom that we need.
And ladies, if you're listening, I want you to know that this broadcast here, we want to give you permission to grieve. And it doesn't matter how long ago you went through whatever that hard thing was. Too often, as Heather said, too often we buck up Christianity, and we smile and go, Romans 8:28, expect something great. Well, if Jesus grieved, and I love how the Bible study, there were spaces where you authentically show in Scripture the places where there's grief. And so, friends, if you're listening, it is okay for you to grieve the changes in your life, the things that are different, that will never be the same, the losses. Those are things that you can and must grieve, so that you can allow God to do something new in its space. And so Amy Dossey said that she loved that message. And Heather, I'm so glad that you wrote about it in Renewed. One of the last things I want to talk about just for a moment is, especially in the early part of the Bible study, you talk about the dynamic between Ruth and Naomi. And I love how you said that sometimes God puts people in our lives to help ease the weight of our emotional burdens. Mm-hmm. So if you can, just give some highlights about how that statement rose out of the story.
Yeah, so I think that as you know, as you're looking at Naomi's story, and I was studying, okay, how did God move for her? Because we know, God is hardly mentioned in the book of Ruth. He is mentioned, but it's not very much. But still, he's the hero. He's always the hero. And so, I was asking him, okay, how is God moving? How is God helping to care for Naomi? And one of the ways that he did that was through Ruth's friendship. And so I think just this acknowledgement in Naomi's story that sometimes, that God's hope is delivered through human hands, and through, we have these, friends who are around us, and, people who surround us in our tribe, and, or in our village, or whoever it is, sometimes God delivers his hope through human hands. And so just looking at one of those ways was just a really beautiful way to acknowledge that even as Naomi is telling God, this is not the story I want, he is about to flood her with this loyal, unwavering friendship from Ruth. And what a beautiful way for him to provide for her emotional needs and to help her carry that emotional burden. So knowing that and seeing that might remind us, he's doing the same thing for me. He will do the same thing for me. And that brings me hope. And I hope it does for you guys today too.
Oh, that's so good. In the comments, I love, there's this back and forth between Amy Dossey and Brenda Gibbs. And I met these lovely ladies in Fort Worth, Texas a few years ago. And they have been great supports for each other. And so I've got, Amy says, hear that, Brenda Gibbs. And we were talking about the people in the lives. And then afterwards, Brenda says, he sure does. He put Amy in my life. And so I love the fact that the ladies recognize how God is doing that. Colleen Hickey, she says that she has grieved, and she knows that God will pull her through this. He is still using me for greater purpose. That's beautiful. And earlier, I want to acknowledge that, ladies, you've done a great job in the chat. Cindy, she talked about the hard season, the death of her stepdaughter. And so these are real things that we're talking about, ladies. And the beautiful part about this is that when we give God a space and time, when we stand in God's word and we allow God to meet us where we're at, that's how we're renewed. And so, Heather, give us the details on the Renewed Bible Study. What is this experience like for ladies?
Yeah, so it's a 4-week study, so it's shorter. It's intentionally written for, women who are juggling many things right now. I don't know, say remote learning, working from home, trying to figure out what's going on with our COVID lives right now. So it's 4 weeks. Within each week of study, there are 3 homework lessons. And when we say homework, it's really just some questions and some things to read. So, a few paragraphs to read to kind of help guide your own personal study of the book of Ruth. And then at the end of the study, there are leader helps included in the participant workbook. So for anyone wanting to guide a group through the study, we've got suggestions and things with questions to ask to foster discussion and, rich content among fellowship of believers. So it's designed for women who are walking through busy seasons, but also to develop rich and meaningful friendships and conversation with others.
Magnificent. And so right now you are working on an experience in your community that you want to invite women to for groups. We've got just about a minute left, but tell us about some next steps that ladies could take if they want to be more connected with you.
Yep. So I am starting an online study of Renewed in my private Facebook group, and you can go to the Rescued Letters at my Facebook page. We'll put a link for you somewhere in that, I'm sure. And but on September 30th, we're starting an online study for Renewed, and then we're going to faithfully walk through reading the entire Bible over the course of the next 2.5 years or so, along with some other Bible studies, including one of Barb's. So I hope you'll join me in that group, in my private Facebook group.
Beautiful. Well, ladies, in the comments and on the screen, you've got the information for you to get connected to Heather. We've got some other ladies who jumped in. And so as we get ready to wrap up, I want to say, Lynette, thank you for sharing your comment. Lynette talked about how God works through his people and he doesn't have to, but she is glad that she's being used by God to bring comfort and joy to others. Oh, that's beautiful. Brenda, girl, I love you. Brenda, thank you for how you just been such an encouragement to me. So friends, thank you for joining the conversation that Heather and I had this evening about how we live when we don't like our story. I want you to go check out the Renewed Bible Study, because this is a Bible study that is filled with hope, especially when you've had changes in your life that are just tough to deal with. And you can get connected with Heather. If you love this broadcast, know that there's some women who need to hear it. Please share this from the Facebook page. And then if you want to watch past episodes of the Better Together Facebook Live, you can go to barbruce.com on the blog page, and you can listen to past episodes and watch past episodes. And so, Elizabeth, thank you for tagging Heather's Facebook page. Elizabeth, if you could toss up a link. I think she already linked to Heather's Bible study as well. There it is. So, Heather, thank you again for joining me this evening.
Thank you so much for having me, Barb. And thanks so much, ladies, for hanging out with us.
Ladies, you've been amazing in the comments. Thank you for how you have joined with us. I hope to see you next week for the next Better Together Facebook Live. And please join me at 8 o'clock for the Surrendered Devotional launch event. We'll see you next week, ladies.
Bye, gals.